If you want to write a book review that's quite creative and stylish, then you may want to add some metaphors or similes. And what we'll do here is we'll look first of all at a couple of examples that you want to avoid, and then we'll look at some more positive examples as well. So in the first case here, we have a comparison of this book to being gifted a box of chocolates. And that sounds okay, but the remains of the day has nothing to do with chocolates. It's about a butler who's a fairly stiff figure, and none of the metaphors in the book are really about chocolate. We have metaphors in the book that have to do with light and darkness, with clothing, with the landscape, but there's nothing in there really about chocolate. Even the title, The Remains of the Day, you know, if you wanted to connect it, maybe you can say something about eating after 8, chocolates in the evening, that kind of thing. But beyond that, it doesn't really work. And so the biggest thing to avoid is just to pick a random metaphor where you think, well, I like the book and I like chocolate and we can compare them. That does not work. You really need to pick a metaphor that is kind of inherent or organically related to the content of the book. The second one is also problematic because here we have a phrase that's very cliched. So pulls out all the stops. That's a cliche. And you want to pick metaphors that are fresh and interesting and are going to startle your reader, perhaps. So it's okay to use the odd cliche, but you have to be careful with it. Moving on to some more positive examples here. In this case, we have a comparison of this book to a washed-out watercolor painting. And then the image is elaborated in what follows. Now, that works in this case. Unless you're John Banville, then it's probably not the right thing to say. But in this case, it works because the sea is very much about, well, the ocean and the waves and the water. And so by thinking about water, we've picked a metaphor that is closely related, that works with the actual text. And the last sentence we've added here kind of works that out, that if the painting is dreary and dull, we can say something similar about the book. The word digressive maybe doesn't quite work quite as well with a washed out watercolor painting, although maybe you could say that as the paint moves around, maybe it digresses. But in this case, we've just added digressive in part because maybe it describes the novel, but also to complete the alliteration, which is another nice stylistic effect. One more positive one here. Lord of the Flies is the last book I would take to a deserted island. It might be useful to stoke a fire, but its depressing story of bullying fails to inspire. So what we've done here is we've taken this image of a deserted island, which can be a bit of a cliche, and we've talked about stoking a fire. We want to burn the book. That's the only way in which it is useful. But this works because Lord of the Flies takes place on an island, right? It's all about being on a deserted island and having to survive. So in this case, we've kind of recuperated the cliche. We've resuscitated it and breathed some life into it. And then it's totally fine. Notice also one more stylistic detail here. We've added this little bit of rhyme with fire and inspire, and that creates a nice effect as well. The final example is really a mix, and it may work or it may not. It's kind of up to you. In this case, we have two metaphors going on, and I think the one works well with the story. The other one is a little bit more cliched. So the one that works with the story is this notion of darkness and light. So we talk about dark humor and we talk about light. And the story is very much about that. There are lots of metaphors like this in The White Tiger. The other metaphor is harder to spot, and this metaphor is being drawn in and hooked. And I think you can relate this to something like fishing. Does this work? Well, it's fairly traditional kind of language. I think it's probably okay, but often we're not even aware that we're using metaphors. And so I think it's, first of all, good just to point out how metaphorical our language is, and then how easily we mix these things together, where we have this kind of fishing metaphor and we have a dark and light metaphor. I think it's okay in this case, but you could probably do better. You could be more consistent. And the biggest thing is to really think then about, can you find a metaphor that applies particularly well to the book that you are reviewing? Not just a nice metaphor in general, but something that almost comes out of the content or the title of the book, is integrally related, and is something that's really going to be stylish and have an impact on the reader. So just to summarize, watch out for cliches, watch out for unrelated metaphors, and try to pick ones that are organic and fit with the book.